Hello students, welcome to E-Pathshala. My name is Prerna Trehan and I am an assistant professor at GGDSD College, Punjab University, Chandigarh. In today's module, we shall be looking at approach to political theory in terms of Marxism. Throughout the study of political theory, we have realized that there are numerous schools of thought that try to engage in the study of political theory. These various schools of thought themselves have sub-schools and ideological debates within them. One of the approaches that we shall be exploring today is Marxism. Marxism, in its approach, has numerous schools of thought that it explores both on ideological as well as temporal basis. In the start of the module, we shall first look at the difference between socialism and Marxism. In the study of the Marxist approach, we shall try to analyze if Marxism and socialism can be collapsed together or whether they need to be studied as two separate paradigms. Moving on, we shall be looking at the key concepts within the study of the Marxist approach. Some of the key concepts that we shall first pick up are historical materialism and the base superstructure approach. Now we realize that economics becomes the basic foundation of Marxism. Therefore, both historical materialism and the base superstructure model are extremely relevant to the study of the same. The module therefore will try to deconstruct both these concepts and look how these two ideas help purport the ideas that Marxism propounds. Moving on, next we shall be looking at the various schools of thought within the Marxist approach. Therefore, we shall look at orthodox Marxism, structural Marxism, as well as neo-Marxism. Within neo-Marxism, we shall also be looking at different ideas and concepts that have now become a part and parcel of the Marxist approach, including the ideas of ideology as well as hegemony. Furthermore, we shall also be looking at the debates within the structural school of thought. One of the most important debates herein is one between Miliband as well as Poulantzas. Furthermore, this module shall also try to uncover why Marxism still remains an important approach in the study of political theory. Despite the downfall of communism as well as the left in different parts of the world, Marxism continues to remain relevant. It is therefore important to question how this approach has continued to reinvent itself in the study of political theory. The objectives of this module is a broad overview of major approaches, traditions in political theory, that is Marxism. Vincent identifies Marxism as a strand within the variegated doctrine of socialism. Marxism, in Vincent's view, is a distinctive version of socialist thought that can be described as revolutionary socialism. On the other hand, John Elster speaks of a distinctive Marxist method to study social phenomena, implying that Marxism offers a different method and approaches to study society and politics. Gamble, etc. further argue that Marxism proposes a direct link between theory and practice, and therefore crises and reassessments are not new to Marxism. Gamble argues that Marxism was never one paradigm. They were distinct and variegated intellectual currents within Marxism. Gamble identifies interdisciplinary approach of Marxism as a prominent feature. Interestingly, different disciplines have dominated Marxism at different points in history. In the 1970s, state theory dominated Marxist approaches rather than political economy approach. However, 20th century Marxism is generally identified with economism, determinism, and structuralism, which are all interrelated. A dominant trend in Marxism is its perception of society as a totality, an organic whole characterized by interconnectedness. This was suggested by Marx in Grundrisse. This interconnectedness is exemplified in two important concepts of historical materialism and base superstructure analysis, particularly dominant in mainstream Marxist analysis. As Gamble contends, Marxism in the 19th century was centered on a critique of political economy and political liberalism, using the method of historical materialism and category of class struggle. Marx pointed out that liberalism failed to deliver its ideals. Historical materialism is a central feature of traditional Marxist approach. Marx did not formulate the theory of historical materialism. It was developed by Engels after the death of Marx. Engels explains historical materialism as thus, and I quote, designates that view of the course of history which seeks the ultimate cause and the great moving power of all important historic events in the economic development of society, in the changes in the modes of production and exchange, in the consequent division of society into distinctive classes, and in the struggles of these classes against one another." End quote. Vidya-mitra concisely explains historical materialism. According to this theory, the development of human societies is determined by class struggle, which is itself determined by the development of the means of economic production, and the inevitable result of this development is the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism by the proletariat. Capitalism would be replaced first with socialism, and eventually, once abundance has been achieved, with full-blown communism. Historical materialism assumes that society moves in a linear mode of history with successive stages determined by relations of production. Marx's historical materialism was characterized by stages of primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, and communism. Historical materialism has prompted critics of Marxism to call it a teleological theory, a history with an end, that is communism. Vidya-mitra similarly attributes the absence of normative engagements in Marxism on rights, justice, liberty, etc. to the inevitability and historical necessity of a transition to communism. G.A. Cohen gives a different interpretation of Marx's historical materialism. Cohen contends that Marx's historical materialism is not teleological but in sync with modern scientific theories of causality and explanation. Cohen argues that Marx is not making a prophecy through historical materialism. He is only speaking of a possibility of transitions in the absence of countervailing forces. Others defend Marx's theory of history against the charge of teleology with the argument that it was only an explanation of history and not a scientific account of historical stages. The base superstructure framework developed by Marx in a preface to the Contribution to a Critique of Political Economy is further a key to understanding economic determinism and historical materialism in the Marxist tradition. The sum total of all these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of the society, the real foundation on which rises a political and legal superstructure, and to which correspond definitive forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material life conditions the social, political, and intellectual life processes in general. The aforesaid statement is a clear postulate of economic determinism, a structuralist explanation where the mode of production, the economy, determines everything else including consciousness. The base superstructure framework offers little agency to the individual, unlike in the liberal tradition where the autonomous individual is the core of liberalism philosophy. Historical materialism and base superstructure in Marxism underline certain inevitable developments in history over which individuals need not be in complete control. Moreover, relations of production determine the course of history. Marxian analysis almost denies the existence of individuals independent of their class position. This version of Marxism is also identified as the more scientific Marxism, where certain laws of society determine the course of history objectively. This is best seen in the works of Marx and Engels, exemplifying orthodox historical materialism, which is ultimately a brand of economic determinism. Human nature in this perspective is alterable depending on the changes in material relations of production. In Western Marxism, this is exemplified in Louis Althusser's structural Marxism, where the structure over-determines the course of events and where economy determines in the last instance. This version of Marxism is also referred to as anti-humanist Marxism or Marxist anti-humanism. In this version of structural over-determinism, the economy appears as at one level of the structure as well as determines the structure and relationship between parts. Individuals in this perspective are nothing more than bearers of the functions emerging from their locations in the structure. With the decline of the communist regimes in early 1990s, Marxism was deemed dead. The view has been refuted by many scholars who point towards the relevance of Marxist approach in a different way. The rebirth of Marxism post-Cold War is manifested in the works of Western Marxists. This is called analytical Marxism since it attempts to reformulate Marx's ideas in the light of contemporary analytical philosophy. It is important to note here that while Marxism traditionally approached issues through class politics and historical materialism, undermining the role of moral argument, analytic Marxism purports to develop normative arguments to defend Marxist insights. As Kymlicka contends, when Marxism defended the inevitability of proletariat revolution, it was not required to explain the desirability of socialism or communism. However, the normative component gained significance with subsequent Marxist attempts to denounce the inevitability of revolution. Marxism now had to explain why the Marxist alternative is superior or better. Kymlicka explains the shift in Marxist approach as thus. In other words, the death of scientific Marxism as a theory of historical inevitability has helped give birth to Marxism as a normative political theory. This also represents the more humanist form of Marxism in the works of Lucas and Gramsci that gives an important role to human agency or autonomy. Indeed, many have pointed to the striking methodological individualism in analytical Marxism. In the humanist version, there's an ontology for human beings that is not determined by material relations of production. Marxism now has to explain the limitations of and provide an alternative to liberal theories of justice. On the other hand, Andrew Levine contends the moral argument-based nature of analytical Marxism collapsed Marxism into liberalism. Raymer, another analytical Marxist, agrees to this point. In Raymer's views, the boundaries between analytical Marxism and left's liberal philosophy are fuzzy. Raymer, for instance, retains only exploitation as the key idea in Marxism, while other arguments are close to liberalism. The new Marxism is a rejection of economism, determinism, and structuralism. David Marx, however, warns that it is a fallacy to identify every Marxist with economic determinism. Marx cites Kautsky, Lucas, and very importantly, Antonio Gramsci as Marxists who engage with the importance of ideology and hegemony rather than economic determinism to explain the sustenance of capitalism and the hurdles for a revolution. Colin Hay similarly cites Spinoza's relative autonomy theory as a non-economic explanation of state theory within Marxism. Interestingly, non-economic factors like intentions, desires, and beliefs are a part of Marx's method. The theory of alienation in economic and political manuscripts, Singer argues, is a part of the materialistic conception of history. In Singer's view, alienation and historical materialism are not two stages of Marxism. For example, Singer contends that 18th Brumaire itself suggests the role of ideas and personalities and not merely productive forces in changing human history. Also in the Communist Manifesto, it describes history of all societies as history of class struggle and not the history of economic forces. Singer thus concludes that Marx observes that the productive forces of human history make human beings alien from each other, and hence materialistic conception of history and theory of alienation are part of the same theory. In a similar vein, Wood cites practical critical activity in the thesis on Feuerbach and the role of class consciousness in Communist Manifesto that are departures from the base superstructure view in many other works. Robert Brennan, another analytical Marxist, argues that the driving force of change in Marxism is not mode of production. The agent of change is class struggle. David Marx's description of Marxism as realist epistemology throws light on Marxist approach to political theory as well. Marx argues that Marxism is not relativist because it is based on the assumption that knowledge of the social world exists independently of a knowledge of it. This is a positivist view of knowledge. However, unlike positivism, Marx believes that every relationship between social phenomena cannot be directly observed. However, like positivists, Marxism agrees that there is a logic of necessity and causality, making Marxism almost a science. The contribution of Marxism, however, lies not in interpreting and unraveling causal explanation, but also in changing it. Marx therefore underlines Marxism at its best as a humanity-centered and activist philosophy. Marxism's interesting contribution lies in the nuanced position on structure and agency, or class relations and individualism. Elster underscores the methodological collectivism as the mainstay of Marxist methodology. That is, the explanatory order, there are supra-individual entities prior to the individual. At the same time, an ethical individualism is manifest in Marxist German ideology and the theory of alienation wherein communism is superior to other forms of Marx on account of its potential towards full realization of human beings. In the 1990s, the more autonomy-based Marxism combined with postmodernism resulted in a new version of post-Marxism where class and similar concepts became social imaginaries rather than definite empirical realities. Let us now try to summarize whatever we have learned throughout the module. In the module concerning Marxist approach to political theory, we see that there are many debates and many issues that still remain unresolved within the school of Marxism. Marxism has led to numerous ideological schools coming within its folds. So therefore, we have various schools such as critical theory as well as the structuralist school within the domain of neo-Marxism after the coming in of the orthodox and classical Marxism. Within this division, there is also a temporal division in the works of Marx. Therefore, we have a young Marx and a mature Marx. The difference in writings between these two temporal divisions also leads to the coming up of different ideological schools of thought within the fold of Marxism. In the module, firstly we realized that despite different commonalities between socialism and Marxism, they are not entirely the same. In fact, there are various issues and goals on which both Marxism and socialism differ. Therefore, it is very important to read Marxism as a separate paradigm from the reading of socialism. Next, we realize that Marxism is essentially a revisionist theory. It came up as an antithesis to capitalism in the 19th century and sought to offer an alternative to the dominant liberal capitalist ideology being espoused then. Essentially, with economics being the foundations of the Marxist theory, the Marxist approach revolves around the division of society into classes. These classes have a basic division between the haves and the have-nots. Eventually, this class division leads to the inevitability of class struggle and thereby class conflict. Moving forth in this idea of economism within the Marxist approach, we also uncovered the ideas of historical materialism as well as the base superstructure model. The historical materialism idea is adapted from the idea of dialectics as put forth by Hegel, with Marx asking materialism or material or matter as being the basis or the moving force in society. Now matter came into being as the most important and founding force within the Marxist approach. Historical materialism thereby ended up dividing the entire historical movement of society into different phases. From primitive communism, we moved on to slavery. Therein came the advent of feudalism. Followed by feudalism, there was the advent of capitalism. Finally, following class struggle and class conflict by means of revolution, Marx hopes to establish dictatorship of proletariat and the setting up of a socialist state. Finally, the weaning away of classes and the devolution of the same would lead to the coming up of a classless and stateless community, which is the final utopia of the Marxist approach. This base superstructure model uncovers this economic base in the Marxist approach. Marx, when he explains the entire idea of his theory, puts economics at the base of the model, with the superstructure comprising of all the rest of the things. So society, culture, religion, etc. all form a part of the superstructure, wherein change can only come if there is a revolution in the base, that is economics. Moving on, we also uncovered the various schools of thought within the Marxist approach. We looked at the debates within the structuralist school of thought, which is that between Miliband and Poulantzas. Miliband talks how the state in the capitalist ideology acquires its character due to the kind of individuals that form a part of the state. Poulantzas, on the other hand, says that the structure of the state itself is such that it will remain the same regardless of where the individuals come from. Another important aspect that we covered in the module was with regard to neo-Marxism. Antonio Gramsci is one of the founding fathers of neo-Marxism. His theories on ideology and hegemony make the Marxist approach extremely complex as well as interesting. The idea of hegemony therefore ends up explaining why Marxist utopia of a communist society has not been able to come into being. The idea that knowledge and ideology propounded by the capitalist class help mold the workers a certain way and prevent the coming up of a revolution. Lastly, we look at the idea of state as well as revolution within the Marxist context. There are two dominant views regarding the same. First view talks about state as the handmaiden of the bourgeois. The other theory, on the other hand, talks about the relative autonomy of the state. Both these theories offer extremely complex ideals and are both relevant in studying the nature of the state in present society. Marxism therefore remains extremely relevant despite all the changes that have uncovered and happened in the society. It offers an alternative to the liberal capitalist ideology and offers a space of protest and resistance against the dominant approach. Marxism, therefore, is extremely important to the study of political theory and in understanding the normative approach in political theory as well. The question of ought to in political theory, therefore, helps Marxism stay relevant and continues to help us in understanding what political theory truly stands for. Thank you.